The great chamber of the Galactic Concord stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction, its crystalline walls catching the light of 3 artificial suns that hung suspended in the void above. And Ambassador Elena Vasquez had never felt smaller in her entire life. She stood on a platform no larger than a dining table, surrounded by the representatives of 347 spacefaring species, each one watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open disgust. And she reminded herself that humanity had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars, so she could certainly survive a room full of judgmental aliens. The High Arbiter of the Silmari, Hegemony, floated before her on a cushion of anti-gravity technology, his elongated body wrapped in robes that shimmered like liquid mercury, and his 4 eyes blinked in a pattern that her translator earpiece identified as deep condescension. "You claim," Cathvorn said, his voice resonating through the chamber like wind through crystal tubes, "that your species deserves membership in our sacred concord. And yet the data your probe transmitted tells a different story entirely." A holographic display flickered to life around Elena, showing images of Earth that she had seen 1,000 times before, but that now seemed almost alien through the lens of these beings' horror. "Your world," the High Arbiter continued, "exists in a state of perpetual catastrophe that defies rational explanation, and we struggle to understand how any sapient life could evolve under such conditions." Elena watched as the display showed hurricanes tearing across coastlines and earthquakes splitting the ground and volcanoes spewing ash into skies that were already filled with a dangerously reactive oxygen atmosphere. "The gravity alone," whispered a delegate from a species she did not recognize, "would crush our children. Your star," another voice called out from the vast assembly, "bombards your world with radiation that would sterilize our home planets within a generation. You have predators," someone else added with audible revulsion, "that hunt and consume other living creatures while they are still alive and screaming." Elena cleared her throat and stepped forward on her tiny platform, refusing to shrink before their judgment. "All of that is true," she said, and her voice carried through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "And yet, here I stand before you as proof that life finds a way to thrive even in the harshest conditions." The laughter that rippled through the assembly was not kind. High Arbiter Cathvorin raised one of his 4 arms, and the chamber fell silent once more. "We have reviewed your species' history," he said, "and what we have found disturbs us more than your planet's hostility ever could." The holographic display shifted to show scenes from human history, and Elena felt her stomach turn as she recognized battlefields from a dozen different eras. From ancient sword clashes to the mushroom clouds of nuclear testing, "You have spent your entire existence," Cathvorn said, "fighting and killing each other over resources and territory and ideas that you could not even agree upon. We have also spent our existence creating art and music and literature," Elena replied. "And we have built civilizations that reach for the stars, despite every obstacle in our path." "You consume poison for pleasure," a Silmari delegate interjected. And the display showed humans drinking alcohol and eating peppers that registered on their sensors as chemical weapons. "We call it cuisine and recreation," Elena said with a tight smile. "Your young engage in activities that result in broken bones and traumatic injuries," another voice added. "And you consider this normal development. Children need to learn their limits," Elena said. "And sometimes that means falling down and getting back up again." The High Arbiter's 4 eyes narrowed in what the translator identified as dismissive pity. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, "we have convened this assembly to deliver our verdict on humanity's petition for membership. And I must tell you that the decision was not difficult to reach." Elena felt her heart sink even as she kept her expression neutral. The Galactic Concord exists to protect and nurture sapient life across the cosmos. Kethvarn continued. And we have determined that humanity does not meet the criteria for sapient classification under our charter. A murmur of approval swept through the assembly, and Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. You are categorizing us as animals, she said, and her voice was flat with barely contained fury. We are categorizing you as a proto-sapient anomaly, the High Arbiter corrected. A species that has somehow developed technology beyond its evolutionary capacity, and as such you are not entitled to the protections that membership would provide. And what exactly does that mean for Earth? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer from the hungry looks on too many alien faces. It means, Kethvarn said, that your world has been designated as an open resource zone, available for harvesting by any Concord member who wishes to claim its bounty. Elena stared at the High Arbiter for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the chamber. You are making a mistake, she said, and I want that recorded for posterity so that when this decision comes back to haunt you, no one can claim they were not warned. The laughter returned, louder and crueler than before. What will you do? A Selmari delegate called out mockingly. Throw rocks at our starships and hope that your primitive weapons can scratch our shields. We will do whatever we must to survive, Elena said, because that is what humans have always done, and we have never failed yet. High Arbiter Kethvora made a gesture that the translator identified as dismissive finality. The Solmari Consortium has already dispatched a harvesting fleet to your system, he said, and they should arrive within your planetary rotation cycle. So I suggest you use the time you have left to make peace with whatever gods your primitive minds have invented. Elena was escorted from the chamber by guards who handled her like she might bite them at any moment. And as she walked through the gleaming corridors of the Orion Hub station, she activated her subspace communicator and sent a single message back to Earth. They are coming, she said, and they think we are weak. The response from Earth Command came back within seconds, carried across the void by technology that humanity had built with their own hands, despite every obstacle the universe had thrown at them. Let them come. The message read, and we will show them what weak really means. Elena smiled as she boarded the shuttle that would take her home. And for the first time since arriving at the Concorde, she felt something like hope rising in her chest. The aliens thought they knew what humanity was capable of, but they had only seen the data, the statistics, the cold facts of Earth's hostile environment and humanity's violent history. They had never seen what humans could do when their backs were against the wall and their very existence hung in the balance. They were about to learn. Overseer Erelthus stood on the command deck of the harvesting vessel Eternal Prophet and watched the blue and green world grow larger in the viewing screen, and he could not help but feel a sense of boredom at the simplicity of this mission. The humans had no real space fleet to speak of, just a handful of primitive stations orbiting their world and some chemical rockets that could barely escape their own gravity well. And the 12 ships under his command were more than enough to pacify the entire planet without breaking a sweat. Scan the surface, he ordered his sensor operator, and identify the highest concentrations of mineral deposits and biological resources. The operator's tentacles danced across the control panel, and within moments, a detailed map of Earth appeared before them, highlighting everything of value that the Solmari Consortium could strip from this world. The planet is surprisingly rich, the operator reported, and the native population has conveniently concentrated themselves in urban centers that will be easy to contain and process. Erelthas made a sound of satisfaction and turned to his communications officer. Broadcast a standard subjugation message, he said, and inform the humans that resistance will only increase their suffering. The message went out across all frequencies, translated into every language that the Concorde's linguistic databases had recorded from human transmissions. And Erialthus settled back in his command chair to wait for the inevitable surrender. What came back was not a surrender. "Attention, alien fleet," a human voice said over the communications channel. "This is United Earth Defense Command speaking, and we have a message for you." Erialthus leaned forward with mild curiosity, wondering what kind of pathetic plea for mercy these primitives would offer. "You have entered restricted space without authorization," the voice continued, "and you have exactly 30 seconds to reverse course and leave our system before we open fire." The bridge crew of the Eternal Prophet burst into laughter, and even Erialthus allowed himself a thin smile of amusement. "They think they can threaten us," his weapons officer said between fits of laughter. "With what army do they plan to enforce this demand? Respond to them," Erialthus said, "and let them know that their bravado is entertaining but ultimately meaningless." Before his communications officer could comply, the sensor operator made a sound of confusion that caught everyone's attention. "Overseer," he said, "I am detecting multiple launches from the planetary surface, and the signatures do not match anything in our database." Erialthus frowned and studied the sensor display, watching as hundreds of objects rose from cities and military installations across the globe, climbing toward the Silmari fleet with surprising speed. "What are they?" he asked. "Unknown," the sensor operator replied. "But they appear to be carrying significant payloads of some kind." The weapons officer laughed again, though with less certainty than before. "Probably fireworks," he said. "Or perhaps they hope to impress us with some kind of ceremonial display." The first missile struck the harvesting vessel Boundless Fortune without warning, and the explosion that followed turned the ship into an expanding cloud of debris and superheated gas for a long moment. No one on the bridge of the Eternal Prophet could speak. "What?" Erialthus finally managed. "What just happened?" "The humans," his sensor operator said in a voice that trembled with disbelief. "They are using nuclear weapons." "That is impossible," the weapons officer protested. "No civilized species would deploy weapons of mass destruction in space combat. The collateral damage alone would be unacceptable." Another explosion lit up the viewing screen, and another Silmari vessel vanished from existence. "They do not seem to care about acceptable," Erialthus said. And for the first time in his long career, he felt something cold and unfamiliar settling in his stomach. It was fear. "Raise shields," he commanded. All ships raised shields immediately and returned fire. But the Silmari fleet had never expected to face real resistance, and their weapons were designed for intimidation rather than actual combat. And by the time they managed to coordinate a response, 3 more ships had been destroyed by human weapons that should not have been powerful enough to scratch their hulls. "Overseer," the sensor operator called out, "I am detecting additional launches from the planet's surface, and these signatures are different." Erialthus watched the display as a new wave of objects rose from Earth, smaller and faster than the nuclear missiles that had already devastated his fleet. "What are they now?" he asked. "According to their transmissions," the communications officer replied, "they are calling them kinetic kill vehicles." "What does that mean?" the weapons officer demanded. The answer came in the form of a solid tungsten rod traveling at 12 kilometers per second, punching through the Eternal Prophet's shields like they were made of paper and continuing straight through the ship from bow to stern. Erialthus had just enough time to realize that the humans had essentially invented a way to throw rocks at starships before the second rod hit and the command deck ceased to exist on the planet below. General Sarah Chun stood in the command center of United Earth Defense and watched the Silmari fleet come apart piece by piece, and she allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction before turning to the business at hand. "Status report," she said. 7 enemy vessels destroyed, her aide reported. 3 more critically damaged and drifting. 2 attempting to flee at maximum speed. Let them go, Chun said. We want someone to carry word back to their masters about what happened here. General, another officer called out. We are receiving reports from civilian areas. There is celebrating in the streets, and people are demanding to know what happens next. Chun walked to the window and looked out at the sky, where the debris of alien starships was beginning to streak across the atmosphere like falling stars. What happens next? She said. Is that we prepare for the response that is surely coming. Do you think they will send another fleet? Her aide asked. I think they will send everything they have, Chen replied. Because we just taught them something they never expected to learn. What is that? General, Chen turned back to face her command staff. And there was something in her eyes that made even the most hardened officers straighten unconsciously. We taught them that humanity does not know how to surrender, she said. And now they have to decide whether they are willing to pay the price of making us learn. Across the vast distances of space, the 2 surviving Silmari ships raced toward the nearest Concord outpost, carrying news of a defeat that should have been impossible. They spoke of weapons that defied civilized warfare and tactics that no rational species would employ. They spoke of humans who charged into plasma fire while laughing and soldiers who kept fighting with wounds that would have killed any sensible being. They spoke of a species that did not understand the concept of acceptable losses because to them, any loss was acceptable if it meant survival. And in the halls of the Galactic Concord, the High Arbiter listened to their reports and wondered, for the first time, if perhaps he had made a terrible mistake. But pride is a powerful thing. And Kethvorin was not yet ready to admit that he had underestimated the primitive savages from the death world called Earth. Assemble the War Council, he commanded, and prepare a proper response to this insult. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you backed humanity into a corner. It was not going to be pretty. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Earth, and Captain James Chun stood on the bridge of the UE's Persistence as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel above. World that made Earth look like a vacation resort. The planet below was designated KX-447 in the Concord databases, flagged as uninhabitable and marked with warnings that no civilized species should ever attempt landing there. And that was exactly why James had come. Captain, his science officer reported. Atmospheric readings confirmed the presence of sulfuric acid compounds at concentrations that would dissolve our standard environmental suits within minutes. Good thing we packed the heavy-duty gear then, James said with a grin that his crew had learned to associate with adventures they would barely survive. The Persistence was one of humanity's new generation of starships, built using reverse-engineered Silmari technology combined with human engineering principles that alien scientists had declared physically impossible. And she was ugly in a way that made her crew proud, where Concord vessels were sleek and elegant. The Persistence was a brutal collection of redundant systems and backup generators, and armor plating that could withstand impacts that would vaporize prettier ships. She had been designed by engineers who had grown up hearing stories about the first alien invasion, and they had built her to survive anything the universe could throw at her. Launch the survey drones, James ordered, and let me know if anything down there wants to eat us. The drones descended through the toxic clouds of KX-447, transmitting data back to the ship in real time. And within an hour, James had his answer. Captain, his science officer said, with barely contained excitement, we are detecting organized structures on the northern continent, and they appear to be artificial in origin. Life? James asked. Intelligent life, the officer confirmed. And based on their energy signatures, they have technology roughly equivalent to our early industrial age. James leaned back in his command chair and considered the implications of what they had found. The Concorde had written off this world as a hellscape where nothing could survive. And yet here was evidence that something not only survived but thrived in conditions that would kill any of their pampered species within seconds. "Prepare a landing party," James said, "and make sure everyone knows to expect the unexpected." The shuttle descent through KX-447's atmosphere was one of the roughest James had ever experienced, with acid winds buffeting the craft and visibility dropping to zero as they passed through cloud layers that registered as corrosive on every sensor. But the human pilots had trained for worse, and they brought the shuttle down on a rocky outcropping near the largest concentration of structures with only minor damage to the hull. James stepped out of the shuttle in a suit that weighed nearly 100 kilograms and felt like wearing a personal tank, and he found himself face to face with beings that looked like they had been carved from living crystal. The Kreth, as they would come to be known, stood nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies composed of interlocking silicon-based structures that allowed them to survive and even thrive in the acid-rich environment that would dissolve carbon-based life. Their leader approached James without fear, and through a translator device that had to work overtime to process their completely alien language patterns. The first words humanity heard from them were, "You are not from the Concorde." It was not a question. "No," James replied. "We are from a world they call a death world, just like yours." The Kreth leader made a sound that the translator tentatively identified as bitter laughter. "They came here once," the leader said, "many generations ago, and they told us we were too primitive and too dangerous to join their civilization." "They told us the same thing," James said, "right before they tried to harvest our planet for resources. And yet here you stand," the Kreth leader observed, "in ships that match their technology. Which means you did not simply accept their judgment. Humans are not very good at accepting things," James admitted. The alliance between humanity and the Kreth was forged that day, built on a foundation of shared rejection and stubborn survival. And it was only the beginning. Over the next 3 years, James and his crew visited 17 other worlds that the Concorde had dismissed as uninhabitable death worlds. And on each one, they found species that had been told they were too primitive or too dangerous to deserve a place among the stars. The Vorkai came from a world with gravity nearly 2.5 times Earth standard, and they had evolved into massive creatures of dense muscle and unbreakable bones who could shrug off impacts that would kill a human instantly. The Morwen had developed intelligence specifically because they needed to outsmart the apex predators that had hunted them for millions of years, and their minds worked in patterns that made them natural. Psychological warfare specialists. The Threk lived on a world where the day-night temperature differential was over 200 degrees, and they had learned to survive by being more adaptable than any environment could prepare for. Each species had been rejected by the Concorde as unworthy of membership, and each one had developed a deep and burning resentment toward the comfortable species who had looked down on them from their paradise worlds. James offered them something they had never been given before: respect, alliance, and the chance to prove that the Concorde had been wrong about them. The Deathworlder coalition was born in the cargo hold of the Persistence, sealed with handshakes and claw clasps and crystalline resonance patterns that meant the same thing in every language: "We are the survivors." James said to the assembled representatives of 6 species who had every reason to hate each other but had found common cause in their shared rejection. And the galaxy is about to learn that surviving is not the same as being weak. Back on Earth, the United Nations had transformed into the United Earth Government, and Ambassador Elena Vasquez had become Secretary General of what was rapidly becoming an interstellar power. She received James's reports with a mixture of pride and concern. knowing that each new alliance brought humanity closer to a confrontation. With the concord that was becoming increasingly inevitable, the Silmari are assembling a fleet, her intelligence chief reported during one of their daily briefings. And our sources indicate it is larger than anything they have deployed in centuries. How large? Elena asked. 400 warships, the chief replied, with support vessels and troop transports that suggest they intend to occupy Earth rather than simply destroy it. Elena nodded slowly, processing the information with the calm that came from years of preparing for exactly this moment. Contact Captain Chun, she said, and tell him it is time to come home. And the coalition forces. Elena looked out the window at the blue sky of Earth, the world that the Concord had tried to harvest and that humanity had defended with everything they had. Tell them to bring everyone, she said, because we are about to show the galaxy what Deathworlders can really do. The message went out across the void, carried by faster-than-light communications that humanity had built with their own hands and improved beyond anything the Concord thought possible, and on 17 different worlds. Species that had been told they were worthless began preparing for war. The Concord had no idea what was coming. Fleet Admiral Karithful stood on the command deck of the Silmari, dreadnought absolute authority, and surveyed the most powerful armada the Concord had assembled in over 1,000 years. 400 warships stretched across the void in perfect formation, their weapons charged, and their crews eager to avenge the humiliation that humanity had inflicted on the Silmari hegemony 5 years ago. All ships report ready for faster-than-light transition, his flag captain announced, and we will arrive in the human system within 6 standard time units. Excellent, Karithful said, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction at the overwhelming force under his command. The humans had surprised them once with their primitive nuclear weapons and their savage willingness to accept casualties that no civilized species would tolerate. But this time, the Silmari had come prepared. Every ship in the fleet carried enhanced shielding designed to withstand kinetic impacts and nuclear detonations, and their weapons had been upgraded to ensure that nothing the humans could throw at them would matter. Begin the transition, Karithful commanded, and let us end this embarrassment once and for all. The fleet jumped into faster-than-light travel, reality bending around them as they crossed the vast distances between stars in moments rather than years. And when they emerged into normal space, they found themselves not in the human home system, but in a region of space known as the Kepler Expanse. They also found that they were not alone. Admiral, his sensor officer said in a voice that trembled with disbelief, I am detecting multiple contacts emerging from behind the asteroid field. How many contacts? Karithful demanded. The sensor officer was silent for a long moment before responding. Over 200 vessels. He finally said, an admiral. Their configurations do not match anything in our database. Karithful stared at the tactical display as ship after ship appeared on the screen, their designs brutal and functional in a way that made the elegant Silmari vessels look like ornaments. They knew we were coming, his flag captain whispered. But how could they have known our route? It does not matter, Karithful said, forcing confidence into his voice that he did not entirely feel. We still outnumber them nearly 2 to 1, and our technology is superior. Admiral, the communications officer interrupted. We are receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel. Put it through, Karithful commanded. The face that appeared on the viewing screen was human, a middle-aged male with scars on his face and eyes that held no fear whatsoever. Attention Silmari fleet. Captain James Chen said, you have entered coalition space without authorization, and we are giving you one chance to turn around and go home. Karithful made a sound of contempt that the translator rendered as dismissive laughter. You are outnumbered and outgunned, he replied, And your coalition is nothing but a collection of primitives from worlds that even we rejected as worthless. James smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Carithful's four stomachs tighten with unease. I was hoping you would say that, James said, because my friends have been waiting a very long time for this moment. The transmission ended, and before Carithful could issue orders, the coalition fleet attacked. It was not like any battle the Silmari had ever experienced. Human ships charged directly into the Silmari formation, their shields absorbing punishment that should have destroyed them while their weapons tore through the enhanced armor that was supposed to protect the Concord fleet. But the humans were not the worst of it. Volkai assault craft, designed for operations in crushing gravity that would kill any Silmari, slammed into the hulls of dreadnoughts and disgorged boarding parties that fought in conditions that should have been lethal. Carithful watched in horror as footage came in from the ships under attack, showing massive Vorkai warriors tearing through sealed bulkheads with their bare claws and shrugging off weapons, fire that would have vaporized his own troops. They are fighting in vacuum, his flag captain said with naked disbelief. Their biology can survive direct exposure to space. How is that possible? Carithful demanded. They evolved on a death world, the flag captain replied. And for the first time, that phrase carried a weight of meaning it had never held before on another front. Kreth infiltrators were dissolving through the hulls of Silmari vessels, their silicon-based bodies immune to the security measures that had been designed to stop carbon-based threats. They moved through the ships like ghosts, sabotaging critical systems and leaving chaos in their wake. And the Silmari crews had no idea how to fight an enemy that could walk through walls. But perhaps the most devastating weapon in the Coalition arsenal was the Morlun. They did not board enemy ships or destroy them with weapons. Instead, they broadcast transmissions directly into the communication systems of the Silmari fleet. And those transmissions contained psychological warfare the likes of which the Concord had never encountered. Carithful watched as ships began surrendering without even being attacked, their crews broken by messages that bypassed their rational minds and struck directly at the deepest fears that evolution had planted in their psyches. What are they doing to them? He demanded. I do not know, his communications officer replied. But the surrendering crews are reporting hallucinations and paranoid episodes and complete psychological collapse. This is not war, Carithful said. This is something else entirely. This is what happens. A voice said over the fleet-wide channel. When you underestimate Deathworlders, James Chen's face appeared on every screen in the Silmari fleet, and he was still smiling that unsettling smile. Your species evolved on worlds where nothing wanted to kill you. James continued, and you built your civilization on the assumption that the universe was fundamentally safe. Explosions bloomed across the tactical display as another wave of coalition ships tore through the Silmari formation. We evolved on worlds that tried to kill us every single day of our existence. James said, and we did not just survive, we thrived, and we are very, very good at fighting. Carithful looked at the tactical display and realized with cold certainty that he had led his fleet into a trap from which there was no escape. Of the 400 ships that had entered the Kepler expanse, barely 70 remained operational, and more were falling every moment. Order all ships to retreat, he commanded. Maximum speed back to Concord space. The survivors of the Silmari Armada fled the battlefield, and the Coalition let them go, just as they had let the survivors of the first battle go 5 years ago, because James Chan understood something that the Concord had never grasped. Fear was a weapon too, and the stories those survivors would tell would be worth more than any ships they could have destroyed in the aftermath of the battle. As Coalition ships collected escape pods and treated wounded enemies with a mercy that confused their prisoners, James stood on the bridge of the Persistence and watched the retreating Silmari fleet dwindle into the darkness. Should we pursue? His first officer asked no. James replied, "Let them run home and tell everyone what happened here. And what happens next?" James turned away from the viewing screen and thought about the message that Ambassador Vasquez was probably already composing. The demands that humanity would make now that they had proven their strength beyond any doubt. Now we find out if they can learn from their mistakes, he said, or if we have to teach them again. Far away, in the great chamber of the Galactic Concord, High Arbiter Kethvorin received the reports from the survivors of his grand fleet and felt something he had never experienced in his long life. It was the realization that everything he had believed about the universe was wrong, and for the first time, he began to understand what it meant to be afraid. The great chamber of the Galactic Concord was silent for the first time in living memory as ambassador. Elena Vasquez walked to the speaking platform, and this time, no one laughed at her presence. The representatives of 347 species watched her with expressions that ranged from fear to grudging respect to naked terror. And Elena took a moment to appreciate how much had changed since her first appearance in this room. 6 years ago, High Arbiter Kethvorin floated before her on his anti-gravity cushion. But his posture was no longer one of condescension, and his 4 eyes would not meet her gaze. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, and his voice was quiet and subdued. "The Galactic Concord recognizes the Deathworlder Coalition as a legitimate interstellar power, and we are prepared to negotiate terms for peaceful coexistence." Elena nodded, her expression carefully neutral despite the satisfaction that burned in her chest. "The Coalition appreciates the Concord's change of heart," she said, "and we have come prepared to discuss the future of our relationship." A murmur of anxiety rippled through the assembly as delegates wondered what demands the victorious humans would make. Some expected territorial claims that would carve up Concord space, and others anticipated economic demands that would strip their worlds of resources, just as they had planned to strip Earth. A few of the more pessimistic species had already begun preparing evacuation plans, convinced that the Deathworlders would want revenge for centuries of being. Dismissed as primitive savages, Elena let them worry. For a long moment before she spoke again, "The Deathworlder Coalition," she said, "is not interested in conquest or revenge or punishing the species who looked down on us for so long." The silence that followed was confused rather than fearful. "We did not fight our way to this moment so that we could become what you were," Elena continued, "and we have no desire to rule over species who cannot defend themselves." "Then what do you want?" Kethvorin asked. And there was genuine bewilderment in his voice. Elena smiled. And unlike the smiles that Captain Chun had shown during battle, this one was warm and genuine. "We want to join the Concord," she said, "as full members with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." The confusion in the chamber deepened, and Elena could see delegates struggling to understand what kind of trick this might be. "You destroyed our greatest fleet," a Silmari delegate called out, "and you humiliated us before the entire galaxy. And now you want to be our partners?" "Yes," Elena said simply. "Why?" Kethvorin demanded. "What possible reason could you have for wanting to join the organization that tried to destroy you?" Elena turned to face the assembly fully, and when she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "Because you need us," she said. "Even if you do not realize it yet," she gestured, and a holographic display flickered to life around her, showing star charts and sensor readings that the Concord's own scientists had not yet seen. "Our long-range probes have detected something beyond the galactic rim," Elena said. "Something vast and ancient that is moving toward inhabited space at speeds that should not be possible." The display zoomed in on a region of space that had always been considered empty and showed patterns of energy and movement that made the assembled delegates shudder with instinctive dread. "We do not know what it is," Elena continued, "and we do not know what it wants. But we know that it is coming, and we know that when it arrives, it will not care about the distinction between Concord species and Deathworlders. How long? Cathvoran asked, and his voice was barely above a whisper. Our best estimates suggest perhaps 50 years, Elena replied. Maybe less if it accelerates. The chamber erupted into chaos as delegates shouted questions and accusations and desperate pleas for more information. And Elena let them exhaust themselves before raising her hand for silence. The Concord built its civilization on the assumption that the universe was fundamentally safe, she said. And you rejected species like humanity because we reminded you that safety is an illusion. She paused, letting her words sink in. Deathworlders evolved to survive in environments that tried to kill us every day. And we developed instincts and abilities that your species abandoned millions of years ago because you no longer needed them. You are saying that we are weak, a delegate accused. I am saying that you are specialized. Elena corrected, and specialization is wonderful when conditions remain stable. But when conditions change, it is the generalists who survive. She gestured at the display showing the approaching threat. Conditions are about to change, she said, and when they do, you will meet species who know how to fight and survive and adapt to situations that should be impossible. You will meet Deathworlders. High Arbiter Cathvoran was silent for a long moment, his four eyes studying Elena with an intensity that suggested he was seeing her clearly for the first time. 6 years ago, he finally said, I stood in this chamber and declared your species to be primitive savages unworthy of protection or respect. I remember. Elena said, I was wrong, Cathvoran admitted. And the words seemed to cause him physical pain. And I think I am only beginning to understand how wrong I truly was. He straightened on his anti-gravity cushion and addressed the assembly, the Galactic Concord. Dismissed humanity and the other Deathworld species because we measured strength by the wrong standards, he said. And we confused gentleness with weakness and comfort with superiority. He turned back to Elena. Ambassador Vasquez, on behalf of the Galactic Concord, I formally invite the Deathworlder Coalition to join our organization as full members, with all the rights and privileges that entails. Elena inclined her head in acknowledgement. The coalition accepts, she said, and we look forward to proving that we can be trusted allies as well as fearsome enemies. One question, Cathvoran said, before we proceed with the formal ceremonies. Ask, what are you? The High Arbiter asked. Truly, what are human beings that you could rise from a world that should have killed you and build ships that rival our own and form alliances with species we dismissed as worthless? Elena considered the question carefully before responding. We are the thing that survives, she said. No matter what the universe throws at us, we find a way to keep going. And we do not give up, and we do not surrender. And we never stop fighting for the things we believe in. She smiled again. And there was something in that expression that made Cathvoran understand why his people had been so terribly wrong to underestimate these creatures. And now, Elena said, we are on your side. The formal ceremonies that followed would become legendary in the annals of galactic history, marking the moment when the Concord finally acknowledged that strength came in many forms and that the species they had dismissed as primitives were perhaps the most powerful allies they could have asked for. But Elena knew that the real work was only beginning somewhere beyond the rim of the galaxy. Something ancient and terrible was approaching. And when it arrived, the Concord would need every Deathworlder they could find. She looked out at the assembled delegates and felt a fierce pride in what humanity had accomplished. Rising from a world that tried to kill them to become the protectors of species who had once looked down on them with contempt. The aliens had mocked humanity as weak, and in doing so, they had made the worst mistake any species could make. They had underestimated the survivors of a death world. And now those survivors were going to save them all.